To look at the side there. Yep. So natural foresight, as some of you may have seen on LinkedIn this past week, or you saw a presentation I did recently on this, in the future school, in our learning ecosystem, with our clients at Kedge, we always teach foresight through the lens of this framework called natural foresight. And as I said in this presentation recently, and I explained, why we call it natural foresight, it's really about looking at foresight from a much more natural growth curves, organic, complex adaptive systems way. And not that foresight hasn't already contained those things, but I think a lot of our frameworks in foresight have still been very linear. First you do step 1, then you do step 2, then you do step 3. And there's nothing wrong with that, but does it really fit into the environment that we're in now? And can it really help us to embrace the complexity that is not only an inherent part of foresight work, but is exponentially increasing across the world, I believe as a sign of maturity, but I understand at the same time that when our systems aren't updated and they meet this new mental model, those mental models clash and we have a breakdown. I've often said, and I said to one of my good friends on social media over the past year over and over again, that we've done a terrible job of bringing people into the future and updating the operating system. And when that happens, we're going to have a clash of mental models. So natural foresight is meant to democratize the future or help democratize the future. I think all good futurists are trying to democratize the future, of course. What does it mean to democratize the future? Just to brief, it means everybody should think like a futurist. The world would be a better place if we all thought this way. We need to update our mental models, our operating systems. So we're all working, I think, to democratize the future, to not just have it come from one voice, one race, one mindset, that it needs to be diverse, that it needs to look at the world in different ways, and that those ways come together and bring together a better way of looking at the whole holistically. This leads us back to natural foresight again. As a matter of fact, natural foresight really is natural foresight because it's based off of natural curves, in particular, the panarchy. And you'll see in just a minute what the panarchy is. But here, I often use this slide just to represent that foresight touches so many different domains, is good for so many different domains, really for the whole of the way the world operates. Natural foresight runs through 4 phases: discover, explore, map, and create. I placed them here like this. You're going to see that natural foresight really works off of panarchies, or complex adaptive systems, complex responsive processes, and complex potential states. So it's really all about using complexity models as our framework for foresight, because foresight and complexity go hand in hand. So I'll go through this rather quickly. You can ask questions of me if you want to. Write me. I'd be glad to hear from you. Or go back and listen to this again and see what parts you feel I left out and ask me to add to it. But this is a slide basically showing, and has been used in several different places. I believe that in particular it came from the evolutionary think tank, and I'll have to go back and catch the name of it again, but out of London, so that I am giving some credit, at least on this slide. On another slide, it had the name down there. So this is an image that comes from someone else. But the trajectory of evolution, we've had it drilled in our head that evolution is about competition and the survival of the fittest, Darwin, but really Spencer, right? Not me, Herbert Spencer. But the truth of the matter is that the arrow of evolution points towards greater integration, greater diversification, and that entity which is from simplicity to complexity, or to cooperation, from competition to cooperation. Some people have written me on this before and said, like, well, yeah, but hold on, evolution does still have competition. I'm not saying that competition is not there, it's not present, but the arrow of evolution is to move from simplicity or competition is simplicity, to collaboration and cooperation, which develops a diversified global entity, a higher systemic level of complexity. So it's interesting that the famous physicist Fritjof Capra says that evolution is no longer seen as a competitive struggle for existence, but rather a cooperative dance in which creativity and constant emergence of novelty, I want you to remember that word novelty, are the driving forces. And with the new emphasis on complexity, I think it was Bill Gates who said that the 21st century would be known as the century of complexity. If the last century was about industrialization, this would be about complexity. This new emphasis on complexity, networks, patterns of organization, and new science of qualities is slowly emerging. I would say that I agree with everything that Capra has said here. A brilliant, brilliant individual, but I would say it's not slowly emerging. It's been here for a long time. It's called foresight and future studies. So I have never read where Capra says specifically that he uses future studies as a part of his work, but he definitely looks at systems not just as data systems or quant systems or systemic nodes, but rather in more qualitative ways. Future studies has been doing that for a long time. Another great influence in the field, Rial Miller, says futures literacy is really about embracing complexity. And specifically, a futures literate person is better able to detect and attribute meaning to novelty. Remember what Capra said about the emergence of novelty. Futures literacy is about attributing meaning to novelty. Foresight is that science of qualities. And complex emergence. What did Capra say? Constant emergence of novelty. Now we're about to hear meaning novelty of complex emergence, that someone who is futures, then someone who is futures illiterate. Becoming more futures literate can enhance human efforts to sense and make sense of complexity. Back to Capra's slide again. Evolution is about a move towards an emphasis on complexity, which is a cooperative dance towards creativity. Creative complexity, creative cooperation is an evolutionary trait. We're meant to have a trait of cooperation, which is the emergent property of greater complexity. Greater complexity makes greater novelty. We recognize that through greater cooperation and sense-making, foresight. I'm sort of going in circles here a little bit, but I want you to see the tie between all of them. So really speaking about Ilka Toomey, in one of his more recent writings in the past couple of years, he said foresight, if it's going to do this, if we're going to become futures literate, which is not about knowing more data, and I'm not knocking data in this presentation, although I do have something to say about data not taking us where we need to go in futures literacy. It cannot. It's not able to. It doesn't. That's not its job. And we need to come to a better understanding of the place of data and stop giving it the emphasis that it really earned even before big data came on the scene by the industrial age. It's riding off the back of the industrial age, and that's why it gets the linear attention and praise and laud that it does. And you'll really find it here in epistemic uncertainty. If I just had more knowledge about data, if I had more data, if I had more knowledge about for me, it's an unknown, it's a known unknown or an unknown known. If I just get it to be a known known, the reason it's not is I need more information. And that is not going to get us to this science of qualities, cooperation, emergence, complexity, the trajectory, the arrow, diversification. It won't get us there. Epistemic uncertainty won't get us there. Here's something that will strike many of you. This is where trends live. This is where trends live. They live here. Their singular siloed trends live in epistemic uncertainty. If I could just have more trends, if I knew more about this trend, I'll gather some data about this trend, and therefore I'll project that data, and I'll know the trend, and therefore I'll be able to, be risk savvy, and I'll know whether it's going to appear or not, whether I put my money or my effort and my time and my eggs in the basket of this trend. That's not foresight. I wrote an article. I don't think I put the slide in here, but we had a training today, and somebody was saying to me, I bought the book On Beyond Zebra by Dr. Seuss because I read an article, I think in 2013, in Fast Company. You can go look it up online, why trends won't help you see the future. As a matter of fact, they can blind you because they are today. The reason you know about trends is they're today. They're on the simple end of the arrow of evolution. So if you go back and look at the arrow again, the trends are down on that simple end. When they come together, there's a divergence and a convergence. There's diversity. There is greater cooperation, or a convergence, or a collision, or a combining of them, which creates sense-making, futures literacy, which Ilka Toomey calls ontological unpredictability. So foresight has been largely in its history focused on epistemic uncertainty, but that's really just trend hunting. Foresight, futures thinking, is not trend hunting. I'm not saying it doesn't include trends. Trends have meaning, they have timing, they have direction, they have growth or shrinking, and they tell us something about the pathway, but they don't tell us everything. Many times they don't even tell us the most important things. And as my good friend Travis Cupp said the other day, foresight needs to really move away from trends as it's beating heart, the blood circulating. The beating heart is pattern and sense making, it's futures literacy, it's moving towards greater cooperation, it's a science of qualities. That's what ontological unpredictability is. It's understanding the nature of reality. Ontology, the nature of reality, can be unpredictable. It's not about just gaining more certainty. It's about becoming comfortable with uncertainty. It's actually about dancing, as Fritjof Capra said. If you go back to the quote again, you'll see he said a dance with complexity, a dance with cooperation, a dance with evolutionary development, a dance towards global entity of diversification. That's ontological unpredictability. Thank you, Ilka Toomey. This is what we need, and you'll see it in a moment more. So this is really a place of the organic, of the natural. Mechanical epistemic uncertainty, natural ontological unpredictability. Changing the nature of the future. The nature of the future is evolving, it's changing, it's morphing. And the reason that the struggle happens in the world is because we don't move with the morphing. Systems grow old, they die. We hold on to for 100 years, they're breaking down. Yes, it's not natural to hold on to those systems. They had their place, they had their time. They may have not even been in those places and times, but definitely old mindsets and old systems in a new era won't work because the nature of the future is changing. Companies really struggle with this because they have laws about bottom line and meeting their stakeholders, and the rest of that story. They struggle with this idea that futures thinking, futures literacy is not about gaining more knowledge about trends. It's about, as Capra says, as Miller says, as Schultz says, it's about understanding what's emerging. So another way that Rial puts this is he says, we often think about futures as anticipation for the future. But futures literacy is really anticipation for emergence. As a matter of fact, as Capra and many say, that when we really understand emergence, greater complexity, we move into collaborative or cooperative sense-making. So if I really look at things individually or monolithically, like trends, if I make a middle space where I'm like, oh, well, I personally am becoming a sense maker, but that's still not really the end goal. Futures literacy is not individual, it's collective. Collective futures literacy brings us cooperative emergence to be able to see what is trying to emerge, to create it, recognize it, pull it, give birth to it, the matrix of creativity, cooperative complexity. It's futures literacy. So the natural foresight framework looks like 4 quadrants. Maybe you would even say 4 steps. Fine, I want you to learn it. But the truth of the matter is it's based on all that I've just said. It doesn't start with discover and move to explore and then map, because that's not the way the world works. Natural, organic, the changing nature, natural, of reality is fluid. So the framework, even though it's presented like this so that people can get their toe in the water and get in and start using it, is really not based on quadrants or certainly not linear steps, but it's based on the flow of reality. And we can jump in and we can jump out at different places. As a matter of fact, you heard me say earlier that it's really based on complex adaptive systems, or what we might call the panarchy. So the panarchy is not the figure 8, the infinity, the complex system, that what you're seeing here is a CAS. And you might start down in the bottom right-hand quadrant with a collapse, like the forest fire, and the forest got too dense and so it collapses, and then a new forest comes in its place, and renewal and reorganization, and then there's new growth, and it grows and it becomes a new forest again. It reaches maturity and the cycle starts over again. Complex adaptive systems. Living systems. That's how we need to approach the world, or we're not going to understand the complexity that leads us to emergence, which allows us to see what the future is and sense make about the novelty and pull it forth. So if you look at the natural foresight system here, you'll notice that what was discover, explore, map, and create, I've got to do it so that you guys see it right. It actually starts at the bottom. It says discover, explore, map, and create, and do it all again. And how do we do it all again? Well, if you know anything about foresight, you're probably looking at this and thinking, oh, I see archetypes here. Good for you. The natural foresight model allows you to see these archetypes even more clearly. But it leads us also through this pathway. Maybe I'm in the growth pathway. Maybe that's where I am sort of on my panarchy or on my growth curves. And if I'm there, then I need to start there and move through the process. But that doesn't mean that just my organization or just my company or just my life or just my initiative is the only thing happening in the world. There may be other curves going on at the same time. That's what a panarchy is. Panarchies are nested complex adaptive systems. And the natural foresight method is meant to be 3, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, to allow us to understand that while part of the world is moving through a map, it might be time for me to move through an exploration, or to see that an adjacency is renewing and that they play on one another. So that doesn't mean that necessarily the world's brought into some constant stasis. As a matter of fact, if we were to look at this, as it says on the slide here, as local, maybe local government, regional government, and global government, or oftentimes I like to say local stands for technology, which we know moves really fast, and society moves not so fast, and government at the top, the big one, moves really slowly, but they influence one another, right? Technological curves, you see the collaborative consumption, the sharing economy, speeding up laws and policies and governments in place trying to fight back and tamp down those things. You see even the recursive loops in here, like the remember, the revolt, smaller curves speeding up larger ones, larger curves slowing down smaller ones. So that when we do foresight work, we have to look across these panarchical nested systems. And that helps us to really understand what's trying to emerge and what's not. That small curve may be speeding up that bigger curve, and we see that those big curves are collapsing while the small curves are renewing or regenerating or transforming and changing the world. And how does this impact society? And we can look at foresight across multiple complex adaptive systems, also complex responsive processes, how people interact with each other. As Nora Bateson recently said, that when we try to break individuals down into their behaviors, we really get rid of that person. When we try to measure a person, we dispose of them. It's really the interaction between people and not people, bio-centric systems that allow us to understand what's trying to really unfold. Natural foresight. So there's many ways that this can actually work out. As a matter of fact, you may have heard me speak on holoptic foresight dynamics before, not a framework, but really a mindset. And if we think about those 3 different panarchical or complex adaptive systems that we see nested here in this slide, and we sort of apply them to monoptic, panoptic, holoptic. We can sort of trace again Ilke Tuomi's idea of epistemic uncertainty on one end, monoptic trends, just trying to gather more data, to this middle space of, well, we've extended our foresight a little bit. At least we're starting to think now about foresight being outside time, but being in space. And so we're looking across more systemically. We're not thinking about isolated trends. We're looking across actors and players. But a holoptic way of seeing the world goes beyond that. And it says that foresight is not bound by these mechanical ways of viewing the world, but rather foresight looks beyond time and space to this wholeness, the cooperative one that sees or makes sense of the world, what's trying to emerge. This is an environment of intentionality, multiples, emergence, decentralization, swarming and hiving, and common experiences, and the blurring of those hierarchies that you see not only in monoptic, but in panoptic environments, but a holoptic. By the way, if you've seen some of my other presentations, you know that the word holoptic comes from holopticism, which is, or holoptic fly's eye. It really means, like, if you look at a dragonfly, their eye looks like it covers the whole head. A holoptic view of the world is being able to see front, back, side, up and down all at the same time like a fly does, except not see 30, 40, 50, 60 images, 100 images. They all converge as one image. I see behind me, I see in front of me, I see beside me, I see up and I see down, but I see it as a whole. I see across the nested panarchies. I'm doing my foresight work and efforts across those emerging nests, those cooperative nests, and I'm not looking at it like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So as you dive into the Natural Foresight Framework and you grow with it, you start to go deeper down the rabbit hole. But don't worry. We designed the framework to be very intuitive so that you're like, oh, that sounds like a little bit much for me. You're going to want to dive right in because it's designed for people to get their foot wet in foresight, not to drown in the waters, but to slowly, as you're ready, to move from a monoptic view to a panoptic view to a holoptic view. It grows with you, as something natural would. And so I just stuck this slide in here. You can go back and look at it. You can freeze frame here if you want to, but here's sort of the 4 things that make up holoptic vision, or what Capra was calling dancing with cooperation and complexity, and what Miller calls futures literacy, but really takes it a step further and says that it's that cooperative dance together that does something more. It creates an evolutionary trait. Yes, we as a species should be moving toward, back to our arrow again, from simplicity to a global entity that allows us to produce, as a species, an evolutionary trait of cooperative sense-making of emergence. Foresight. Foresight is supposed to be a human evolutionary trait, or a species trait. That's why I go back and read some of Rial Miller if you think I've gone off the deep end here, and you'll see him talk about anticipatory sciences. As a matter of fact, today we don't even see a lot of futurists talk about anticipation, but there's a science, been around for a long time, of anticipatory systems. The mushroom kingdom has been a famous one. It knows when the environment's changing and changes before the environment comes because it understands emergence. We're supposed to have that same evolutionary trait. We're so stuck on the competition part of evolution. We're so stuck on the fight and flight that we don't know that's not where we're supposed to stay. You hear people today say, like, we're just, base and lizard brain and all that. We're not supposed to stay there. We're supposed to evolve. And foresight not only helps us do it, it's supposed to be the end result of doing it. And so, again, you can go back and stop on this slide. I'm not going to go in depth here, but this is just a recursive loop both ways. It shows us how, as I was just saying, I should have been on this slide when I was saying all of that, that complex collaboration, or collaboration plus complexity, which is emergence, allows us to have an emergence perception, or again, to embody the trait of foresight. And there's a recursive loop between collaboration plus complexity and perceiving the emergent reality, or back to ontological unpredictability, perceiving the emergent nature of the future. Yes. And so the reason I put this slide in here is because, and again, you can stop on this and take a gander if you want, but on the left-hand side for me, you sort of see somewhat foresight as many are teaching it today or have taught it. Not all. I definitely don't think the ones I've mentioned before were. But it's so easy for us to say, oh, foresight is about getting numbers and data. Maybe some of it's qualitative, but we got to have a trend and we got to have all these things. I'm not saying, again, that those things are not a part of foresight. If you come to KEDGE, if you go to the future school, you'll see trends for sure. But we talk about them in their place and what they lead to and where they belong. And if we look at the future from sort of our linear, where we are today, out into the future, 2020, let's look at 2050. We will tend to move from the future as a time to the future as at least a space. What will the future be like 20 years from now? Will I be walking around in it? Foresight's are a great way, scenario is a great way in foresight to lift somebody up out of where they are in time and place them in a space. It moves foresight beyond being temporal to spatial. However, all of that's still reductive. And Okatumi talks about this. The probable space, future is a time, as the future is reductively determined by the past. We tend to think about extrapolating. The future as a space or a place is really that possibility, the alternative space. But this is the future that's recursively expressed as shared dominant beliefs about the present. We can't help it. The present dominant narrative influences us, and we go to write scenarios and we say, and the flying car and the robot and the thing is going to unfold. And some of that's probably true, or more than likely true, but that does not negate, and we've definitely seen it in this time. We've seen it plenty of times before in history. We just don't talk about it often. We've seen it speeding up now. That if you look at the right-hand side, you see the future as an encounter, an experience. The poet Rainer Rilke said, the future enters into us, and I'm paraphrasing, to do its work in us before it manifests through us. It's not the exact words, but you go look up Rainer Rilke and look at the future enters into us. An amazing thought, because foresight, evolutionary trait, futures, literacy, emergence, should start as an encounter or an experience internally. So now going back to my thank you, Wendy Schultz, and thank you, Sohail Nyatella, and thank you, Dr. Jay Carey, and thank you, Peter Hayward, and thank you, Peter Bishop, and thank you, Ilka Toomey. These people have really been doing a great job of saying that the future is an experience, whether they said explicitly or not. The views in this are my own views, not held by anyone else. I'm not saying that they hold them and they can refute them if they want to. It's fine. When we look at the future this way, then we can see the future is not bound by space and time. It's outside spatial and temporal. Now that, of course, doesn't negate spatial and temporal. Here we are. But the future, this is what's so powerful about foresight, is that we see what's emerging. And what's emerging is not spatial or temporal. It's outside of time and space many times. It's not even here yet. It's emerging. And it emerges, or it should emerge, not outside of us, but it should emerge through us and cooperatively or collaboratively. That we become the creators, or we work in tandem with that emergence, creative complexity. And when that happens, then we can move from experience back through space and place and back to time today. We bring the future back to us today. And this is the future expressed outside of time and space. And our present day decisions are not constricted, are constructed by time and space. Therefore, we can move from epistemic uncertainty to ontological unpredictability. We can understand the emergent, changing nature of the future. That is the power of foresight. And I just mentioned earlier, the thinking of natural foresight, and if you look hard enough, you will see the curves here. Now they're just built on top of one another, saying like foresight allows us to see our higher order purpose, higher order DNA. The product of an acorn is not meant to be a million acorns. The product of an acorn is meant to be an oak tree. When you look at that acorn, you don't necessarily see an oak tree. Sorry for the siren. But it's there, and it wants to emerge. Quoting Nora Bateson again, she said in a video from a couple of years ago that, wouldn't it be crazy, or wouldn't it be interesting if the caterpillar, and I'm paraphrasing, if a caterpillar tried desperately to hold on to his caterpillarness because he wasn't able to see, he can't see, she can't see the butterfly within. But foresight allows us to think exactly that way. It's a mental technology to see the butterfly within a caterpillar when the caterpillar is desperately trying to hold on to its caterpillarness, much like our society has been trying to do for a long time. And we're in a time, we have been already, it's just manifesting now, of change. It's forcing itself on us now because we've done a really bad job of shifting mental models and working in collaboration or cooperation with that change. And now it's forcing itself upon us, or breaking down our, not only our systems and structures, our mental models. It's forcing itself into us so that it can manifest through us. It can incubate like the butterfly, manifest through us. I hope that you got a little bit out of what I was sharing today. I know I didn't show you the Natural Foresight Framework has these tools and it does this, and here's how we've used it with companies. Companies all over the world are using the Natural Foresight Framework now because it's a great place for them to start with foresight when they're brand new, and they can use it to do good foresight work and with great outcomes, but they grow with it over time. As somebody told me a couple of years ago, who began using the Natural Foresight Framework for their team at one of the leading internet companies in the world, I love this framework because it allows me to see the world in a natural, organic, progressive, and emergent way, instead of trying to fit foresight into the linear, box siloed ways of the world. Foresight's not meant to be a captive of old strategic planning methodologies or of data and quantification methods that have to be extrapolated. Foresight should take us beyond. As I said earlier, I wrote an article several years ago for Fast Company, Trends Won't Help Us See the Future. In the article, I quoted the Dr. Seuss book on Beyond Zebra. And in that book, if you read it, there's an alphabet, A through Z. And then for those who are willing to see, there's an alphabet that comes after Z. That is what Natural Foresight helps us to do. Not only cover A through Z, but to understand what's trying to emerge after A through Z. And you might be sitting here listening to this today going, but there isn't another alphabet, Frank. And I tell you that there absolutely is. So I challenge you to get involved with the Natural Foresight Framework. As a matter of fact, the certification that is offered through the Future School training, but it's not connected to the Future School, the Professional Foresight Certification that you will find at the Futures, with an S, because there's multiple futures, the Futures School, 2 S's in the middle right there, .com, is a certification, not a certificate, a certification in natural foresight. Rigorous, with assessments and portfolios. And we're so glad that last year, after 3 years before that of working very hard on it, we were able to launch that. And it's now becoming an embedded part of what we're doing with partners and it's not an embedded part of the Design Futures Initiative, but you all got to see recently that we're partnering with them. And so the Natural Foresight Framework bleeds into a course we're developing with them as well. It's part of all of the courses we teach at the Future School, programs we teach at the Future School. We're so glad it's becoming a part of our good friends in Berlin who run the Future Space. And of course, Future Space is a place for many, many different ways of looking at foresight and different methods to be learned. And we're so glad to be alongside all that, but that we'll be sharing it there with that network as well. we invite you to come use the Natural Foresight Framework. We're spreading it around the world. And we're looking forward to writing a reader or an omnibus soon. And hopefully every year, every couple of years, put out a new one of case studies of the Natural Foresight Framework around the world, how companies are using it, how governments are using it, how individuals are using it to create a more natural, organic way, a complex, creative, cooperative, and emergent way of not only using foresight, but giving birth to foresight as an evolutionary trait. So we're excited about that. Thank you for listening to me for longer than I planned on going on. But if you made it this far, then, you know, I'm so glad you stuck with me. And if you didn't make it this far, you won't be hearing this part. But thanks for listening to just a little bit of it anyway. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you guys again soon. Take care until I see you again. Bye-bye.